Throughout Jason Reynolds' book, Stamped, you really get to learn how the powerful are the ones who are writing history. They're the ones deciding who is a good person and who is maybe a bad person. Whilst reading Stamped, though, Jason Reynolds lets you see both sides. He breaks down these historical figures and to who they really were. One example of this is Abraham Lincoln. In modern day, we think of him as this great hero, when in reality, he really just wanted to keep the Union together. A lot of the anti-racists of their day, they just wanted to have the power that comes with that standing. And once they got that power, they do many cruel things to keep it. Racism came about from that exact thing where people were trying to keep this power that they had. An example of this is where poor white farmers and black slaves came together to riot against the rich whites. But so to protect themselves, they sort of pitted them against each other. So then they would focus their anger on each other. It is so crazy and horrible what people will do to manipulate history so then they can look good compared to others. And I think in Jason Reynolds' book, this is really shown and it's really amplified and it really makes you think and learn.
The book Stamped by Jason Reynolds has opened my eyes and changed the way I perceive the world and its history. I'm sure we all have great respect for our nation's leaders, people like Ben Franklin or Thomas Jefferson. These people have impacted our nation in marvelous ways, but I think it's important to note that while these people may have achieved great things, they were not always perfect people. The way our leaders have been portrayed in our media and curriculum is heavily filtered. A great example of this would be Abraham Lincoln. He is known as a remarkable leader, the great emancipator, Honest Abe. He abolished slavery, but the truth is, he believed in anti-slavery, not racial equality. He thought the mistreatment of black Americans was bad for his brand, and he never saw black Americans as actual people. This is one of the many startling facts I learned from this book. It taught me that everyone, even our renowned leaders, have more than one dimension and that they are full of contradictions and flaws, just like anyone else.
Stamp has changed how I view history by opening up my mind to the idea that these historical figures that we praise so well, they have a darker side to them. Like, characters are much more round than we portray them to be. We always think, like, let's say the founding fathers, we always say, oh, they're so great. But in the history of racism, they're really not that great. And also, it matters why a historical character does something rather than what a character does. Like, let's take Abraham Lincoln, right? He did so many great things. He helped abolish slavery and all that kind of stuff. But why he did it is much more important. And when you look at the why, it doesn't really, it kind of diminishes his legacy. So I feel like we should, and these are things that we're not taught in school normally. In school, we're always taught about how great these characters are instead of like the other side of them, because these characters are much more round than we portray them to be.
I think that reading the book Stamped by James Reynolds has definitely changed some of the ways that I perceive the world, because I've learned there's a lot of different perspectives to racism. Like, in a lot of the times when we read about the Civil War, for example, we only really hear about like what it was like for white people, but what was it like for black people? What was slavery like for them? So it's also taught me that there's definitely more racism in the world than sometimes we think there is. Like, some things we don't think are racist, but actually are, such as the movie Tarzan, or, well, one story. And it's just taught me that that it's good to learn about things, because then you can realize that there are problems in this world and that we do need to fix them. So it's definitely been an interesting book to read.
Jason Reynolds has changed the way I view history and the world in several ways. One of those ways is people from history that we have learned about and may have looked up to throughout our lives have been contradictory on the issue of racism. They had racist ideas, but also knew racism was wrong. For example, Thomas Jefferson. He owned 200 slaves, apologized for slavery, and still owned slaves until the day he died. Before reading this book, I only knew the good parts of his story. But now I look at that history in a different way, now understanding more about that history to a deeper level. It also made me more aware of situations. Now I know that there aren't just two sides to everything. There aren't just racists and anti-racists. There are assimilationists, segregationists, and anti-racists. Because of this, Stamp has changed my perspective on history and the world in so many more ways than just one.
Reading Stamped by Jason Reynolds has changed the way I view the world and history. A lot of the history for Black Americans is very complicated, and there's been wrongs, including things like slavery, that should not have existed within the American history, but it existed all over the world at one point, and the way blacks are mistreated can still occur today. A lot of protesting, like including Black Lives Matter, I understand a lot more now by reading this book and just understanding the total history and other people's ideas of slavery and how they thought of Black Americans and the injustice and inequality that they just would pose against them, which is really crazy to think about.
By reading Stamped by Jason Reynolds, it has changed the way I view the world and history. It has made me see that white Americans have always seen Black Americans as in a fear because they're just different. Jason Reynolds has shown us all more than one side to every story. He has shown us how people change, either for worse or for the better. I feel that it has better helped me understand what has happened in our history that many history books don't explain. On top of all this, he has written the book as if we were having a friendly yet important conversation, and that made me enjoy and made me very interested in this book very much.
After reading the book Stamped by Jason Reynolds, my view of the history in the world has changed entirely. Throughout this book, Jason Reynolds repeats many times that this is not a history book. It tells history, but it reads more like a story being told. He uses language that doesn't really resemble most history books, and he's not afraid to tell the truth about many historical figures that tell a different story about what we read in school. A lot of the times in history books and articles like online, they really highlight these figures and the good things and like the positive impacts they've made on civil rights movements that protect the rights of Black Americans. But Stamped really also highlights the mistakes they made, the changes in perspectives they've had throughout their lives, and he does it in a way that's enjoyable and fun to read.